What's up? I'm John Middlekauff, the host of the 3 and Out podcast, and you can find it below in the description. Also, you're watching this on the Volumes YouTube channel. I need you to subscribe right now. Share with your friends. Conference realignment. There are so many angles to this. On the most basic level, I just asked the question. Because when you see the story, and listen, I was shocked. Like, I would say most people was like, what? USC and UCLA are leaving? Before you even, factor in, well, the TV money and the revenue sharing, all you see is the little kid in me. Because, again, this is sometimes why I need to detach from sports. Because I look through everything through the lens of money and how it impacts the business, how it impacts my business, angles I'm going to talk about it, instead of just being like the little kid of damn, that's crazy. USC and UCLA are no longer going to play Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State, Cal, Stanford. They're going to play Illinois, Maryland, Rutgers, Michigan State. That's kind of crazy. And that was, I think, most people's first reaction before. It's well, if you add the Fox revenue sharing and the TV market, and again, that's ultimately where I go to. But on my first reaction, I'm sure like you, was, holy shit, that's wild. Then, after I take a deep breath, it's something as I've gotten older, and this is, I've been listening to Coward for 20 years, and one of his big things back when he was becoming a star, it was who's this Colin Coward guy? He's got a lot of interesting takes. I remember being late in college, because he was very smart, and he used to have this thing say, take the emotion out of it. And as you get older, you have to do that. The number one advice I would give anyone starting a business, involved in their own business, as an employee for a business, is the faster you can learn to take the emotion out of it, the faster you can kind of play this rigged game that we're all in the world of capitalism. Because when you get emotional, it's one thing to be emotional with your family, and even that sometimes you got to separate it. But in business, the faster you can take the emotion out of it, the faster you can get clarity and figure out what's going on. So after the initial sticker shock, which I'm acknowledging that I had, I felt like a little kid. I was pissed off. It's they're leaving us. Why would they do this? The Trojans, screw you. UCLA, I used to love you. You can't leave this conference. Once I took a deep breath, you realize, does it really matter? Honestly, just say it out loud. Does it really matter? And I think the conclusion I've come to now, I'm recording this July 6th, whatever, we're a week removed, maybe a little less, is I don't know if it really does. Because I used to think, when I worked in radio, we had the Raiders. And that was when the Raiders were trying to move to L.A., and L.A. and the league said, you're not going to be allowed to move here, you and Dean. Dean, you're going to have to go on Kroenke's backside, but you're not coming here, Raiders. Find another home. And I'll give, Mark credit. Ultimately, Jerry Jones, the league helped set him up. But they got to Vegas. And I remember a lot of people around here, including myself, because, again, I had a bias. I had an agenda. I was in the business. I didn't want to lose them. I liked having 2 teams in my backyard. I was this is going to fail. This is going to work. He's screwing the people. Years later, the smartest thing they ever did. It actually helped the franchise survive, because they would not have survived around here, and obviously they weren't allowed to go to L.A. And I was probably as loud and as big of a critic for the teams moving to L.A. as anybody, because I've lived 35 of my 37 years in the state of California. I know the way our people think. I know the way West Coast people are wired. I've lived in the Northeast. I just know how different we are, even though I personally have some similarities. But for most of us, we're a lot different than out there. Now, we do love pro sports, but ultimately we love winners. And why the Rams have succeeded twofold: one, their venue is remarkable. Having gone to that thing, it's might be the coolest stadium I've ever been to. And 2, they won. And they've won big. Multiple Super Bowls. They've won a Super Bowl. They basically make the playoffs every year. They become a powerhouse. And when you become a powerhouse and you have an unreal venue, you'll win in the West. You'll succeed in the West Coast. And they have immediately. So I got to take the L's. The Vegas thing has gone really well. If they get a new owner in there, that thing would be a rocket ship. And LA couldn't have gone any smoother. Now we can argue over the Chargers. I think they should have stayed in San Diego, but Dean's too cheap. That's a whole nother can of worms. Bottom line, the Rams have succeeded and the Chargers succeeded enough. So it's worked. So I don't claim to always be right. But ultimately, it shows, most people, the average person that covers the NFL was this is stupid. Because at the time, it's why just leave them in St. Louis, leave them in San Diego, leave them in Oakland. But they made moves. Because in business, you have to be progressive. You can't hold on to the things in the past. You have to think about the future. Ask Blockbuster. They weren't forward thinking when Netflix asked if they could merge. They got wiped the you-know-what out. But they're not alone. That happens to a lot of companies. The brick and mortar, is anything more have a bigger threat over the next 20 years than brick and mortar businesses? We do all of our business on the internet. It's why even as these internet stocks crumble, the biggest difference in 2022 than when the big internet crash happened in 2020, the internet had never really existed to the common civilian. In 2022, our life revolves around the internet. So even as quote-unquote things crash, it's never going to go away. And it's when the economy does come storming back, it's only going to come back stronger. All of our business is going to be based on the internet. That's where our commerce goes, and will only go more moving forward. I tell people all the time, like, my generation, I'm 37, and people younger than me, we're going to buy all of our cars on the internet. We're going to buy all of our homes on the internet. All the purchases that my parents would never in a million years have made on the internet, we're going to do them all on the internet. That's not an opinion either. I think that's a borderline fact. It's inevitable. And I think change in sports, because so much money is on the line, is also inevitable. Now, that doesn't mean we can't go, this sucks, because I think it does suck. But I think once you take a step back, once you take a deep breath, like Colin says, take the emotion out of it, you go, I get it. Because ultimately USC, and it's been talked about now, which ironically has sucked for a decade, but now they got Lincoln Riley, they're going to be good. And when they're good, they're a power. And they carry the conference. Like, Utah is an unreal story. Kyle Whittingham's a badass. Their program produces people to the NFL. They just don't matter that much. Oregon, which is basically Oklahoma State, but even better because they're in the middle of nowhere, but they have this guy named Phil Knight who has unlimited money because he runs, I guess he quote-unquote doesn't anymore, but obviously has funded that program and taken them to high highs. Their value on the open market isn't that great. Again, that's not an opinion. We just saw the Big Ten. They valued UCLA more than Oregon, where you go, look at Oregon's football program just the last 2 decades. It's not even comparable to UCLA. But having UCLA around, now their basketball program is good. And in theory, if they were to get rid of Chip, who has no chance, Chip Kelly has 0 chance to survive, excel, or win in the Big Ten. To me, the only move, and listen, they thought about firing him last year, but he won 8 games in a shitty conference. Chip Kelly will not be the head coach when they go into the Big Ten. That is my prediction right now, July 6, 2022. 0 chance. He does not match up well against physical defenses. It makes no sense. Lincoln Riley, completely higher level, much more. I mean, he's just been winning more lately. Chip hasn't won really in the 2010s, till last year when the conference is really down. Now, here was a main problem with the Pac-12. This guy, I was listening to this interview, this guy named Chris Gotterup. He is a star golfer at Oklahoma who just turned pro. And he actually started at Rutgers. He's from New Jersey, went to Oklahoma for a year, won basically the equivalent of the Heisman Trophy for golfers. It's like the Haskins Award, the Nicholas Award. He won all the awards. He would be the equivalent of like the number 1 overall pick. He's an award winner, star player, like Scotty Scheffler, Jordan Spieth, like that level guy going right to the pros. And I heard him on this interview talk about at Oklahoma when they flew to, tournaments. Most of their tournaments were in like the South and the Southwest. He said, we would take the private jet, as in the private jet that Lincoln Riley, Bob Stoops, and now Brett Venables takes for the football team. And they asked him, is that normal? And he said, well, from what I've been told is most of the SEC golf teams do the same. They fly on private jets to their tournaments. And Pac-12 always hung their hat on like, we are more into the entire athletic program. We're more into as much as football as the Olympic sports. That was Larry Scott's big deal. Larry Scott was an Ivy League elite from Harvard who played tennis, loved the Olympic sports. And a lot of the presidents in the Pac-12 idolize that too, because they're into academia. They love a good whiteboard, a good supply, demand. This is how it works in a textbook. Well, it's not exactly how it works in reality. Because in reality, all the Olympic sports lose money. Not one of them make a penny. The football programs pay for everything. And the SEC put all their chips into the middle of the table on football. And they have dominated. Now, obviously, Nick Saban has led it, but SEC programs the last how many years beside Alabama, Georgia national champion, LSU national champion. Other programs are winning national championships. And because of that, the conference has financially gone to a completely different level. And now the basketball programs in the SEC are equivalent to the Big Ten and the Pac-12 because they have the money to pay for top coaches. Well, also, the Olympic sports, did you see the baseball, the College World Series? Who was there? A bunch of SEC programs. The SEC is going to dominate at all the Olympic sports. Why? They're going to have the most money to pay for the top coaches. They're going to have the most money to pay for the NIL guys, to get the best water polo player, to get the best golfer, to get the best baseball player. That is just a reality. And the Pac-12 was obsessed with putting volleyball games and softball games and soccer games on their network, when the SEC was obsessed with winning national championships in football. Because when they did that, everyone else benefited under the umbrella. Because without football, Title IX just celebrated their 50th anniversary in America. Do you know the first thing Title IX should have done is send a thank you letter to every football program in America? Because without the football programs, no one could finance any of this stuff. And I'm pro Title IX. Hell, I probably have 3 girls when I have kids. And they, hell, might not even be athletes, but if they were, they would benefit if they played college sports from Title IX. But none of those sports, none of them, could financially exist without football. And the Pac-12 has never got that. Their presidents are consumed with academia. You can tell me, well, the Big Ten loves academia too. They clearly care a shitload more about sports. Because at Ohio State, at Michigan State, at Wisconsin, at Iowa, they would never operate like Cal. And I've lived in Northern California a large percentage of my life. My grandpa taught at Cal. I see the way Stanford operates. Stanford was a top 5 program, like basically the last year of Harbaugh and the first 3 or 4 years of David Shaw. Top 5 in the country in football, and they couldn't get 10,000 people to show up. Last year, in 2021, Cal played a game against Arizona, who was a winless football program, and they couldn't travel half their team because of COVID policies. Not by the university, but because of the city of Berkeley, and they lost the game. It was Arizona's only win of the season. That is what this conference is dealing with. And obviously, it's not all the commissioner's fault that some of the programs have slipped, but a reality is this conference, who I love, I grew up loving, and I used to be nostalgic about, now I ultimately don't care. Because if you tell me USC's playing Wisconsin, I'm there. I end up watching more of more of the SEC than I do the Pac-12. Why? It's better football. And ultimately, I watch what the consumer watches, and I see the television ratings. People are not watching the Pac-12. So I have to care what you have to care about. And ultimately, the thing you have to learn in life is that the only person truly who cares about you professionally is you. And you should keep a very, very small circle. My circle in life is like my mom, my grandparents are all passed away, my dad's passed away, so it's basically my mom, my brother, and his family. A small percentage of friends. I mean, if they needed, hey, John, something happened, I need $20,000. There'd be a handful of people I would I guess you can't Venmo, the max is $4.99. For 5 G's. But however, I would get them the cash. And then there are 2 or 3 people that I'm in business with, actually just basically 2. Colin Coward, Guy Haberman. Other than that, I'd be loyal to 0 people. Absolutely 0. If something that determined my future and my financial success. So I don't blame USC and UCLA for not giving a shit about Oregon, for not thinking twice about Arizona, for not worrying about Stanford, because you got to worry about yourself. Because they have been attached to those programs and they've been sinking them. Now, you could argue that UCLA's football program has underachieved for 2 decades. USC just had the worst 10-year stretch in the program history. That's true. But your value is based on, in your lowest moment, what are you still worth? And their lowest moment, now you could argue it's not quite their lowest moment because UCLA hit a home run hiring Mick Cronin, even though I read this article in the LA Times that the UCLA athletic program, $100 million in debt. Their running budget, red figures, $100 million over the last 3 years. Think about that. I can't even imagine what Cal looks like. And USC, as a big-time disaster, they've been getting sued, but they got Mick Cronin and Lincoln Riley. And once UCLA gets the Big Ten money, they can hire a real big-time football coach. Chip Kelly used to be that. He no longer is. He was that in 2009 and 2010. It's 2022. Times have changed. It's Lincoln Riley now. It's, Ryan Day. It's Saban, Kirby, Jimbo. Like, we're living in real times. So I think that ultimately the Pac-12, their two biggest brands, and they are the two biggest brands. You would say Stanford is close, but when I think of Stanford, and I would put Cal under this umbrella too, they are elite universities. You think about them like you would Harvard, Penn, or Princeton. The first thing when I say Stanford, you don't think John Elway. You think academics. It's an incredible school. All these schools that I'm talking about all denied me. I would have no chance to get into any of them. None of them. And that was 20 years ago, let alone now. They'd rip up my application because they rip up most people's application. Cal is the hardest public university to get into in the world. When I think of the top academic universities, again, I'm biased. I'm a West Coast guy. I would choose Stanford. And I wouldn't even hesitate over all the Ivy League schools. But we're talking athletics here. And USC takes football very seriously. UCLA takes basketball very seriously. Those programs just don't. Ultimately, Oregon, they really care about sports. But the Big Ten doesn't value their national reach for whatever reason. To me, Washington, I see get thrown in a lot in just this conversation. Yeah, I think they're a little overvalued. This isn't 1994. I actually think Washington, for the most part, their football program had a stretch of like 4 years with Chris Peterson, who they lucked into. Other than that, they have been a joke. An absolute clown show. I mean, the highlight was like Sark going 7-5 with some big recruits. In the 2000s, they were terrible. Washington State and Oregon State, listen, I enjoy both those two campuses, but ultimately they're irrelevant. And I just don't know if the Pac-12 really cares that much. I heard a rumor last night that Stanford would be cool with just going Olympic sports only, maybe doing some deal with the Ivy League and just kind of cutting football. Does Cal really like football that much? I don't know. Like I said, they didn't allow players to travel, not because they tested positive, but because they were in close contact. In the fall of 2021, the rest of the country was rocking and rolling, pedal to the metal. So it's like, do they really care? I don't know. I would say they don't. And ultimately, it feels like we're headed toward this NFL model of like two conferences. And it pisses a lot of people off because they're holding on to the past, which, listen, when I was a kid, the Giants played the Atlanta Braves. They were in the same division. The 49ers were in the division of the Atlanta Falcons. This is when I was like 10 years old in the mid-90s. Think about saying that out loud. Things change. And eventually there is some sticker shock, the immediate change. And I'm not saying I love it because obviously rivalries had been broken. When I interned, I have a picture in my office right now of the game when Todd Reesing, who was the quarterback for the Kansas football team, when Mark Mangino was their quarterback, played Missouri, whose quarterback was Chase Daniel. At the time, College game day came. The game was at Arrowhead. It was, I think, they were third, fourth in the nation. Kansas, Missouri was a huge rivalry. Well, Missouri went to the SEC. That rivalry ended. Texas A&M rivalry didn't mean that much to me, but obviously that rivalry ended. But ultimately, a lot of these rivalries aren't ending. USC UCLA is going to keep playing. Texas Oklahoma going to keep playing. If people are like, what happens to the Apple Cup? Washington State and Washington keep playing. Did it mean that much last year? No. I mean, both Washington and Washington State fired their coaches in the middle of the season. What are we talking about? So when you value the wrong things, and the Pac-12 did because they were obsessed with Olympic sports, when the worst thing you could ever do for the Olympic sports was care too much about them. Care more about football, and they will benefit. When you have something in your business that makes a lot of money, double down, triple down, quadruple down. That's what the SEC did with football. And that's why they're running circles around everyone right now. The Pac-12 went the opposite because they hired an anti-football tennis player who thought he was a visionary because they could run the network on their own. Hey, Larry, you don't have this isn't Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. Stanford fans won't even show up when they're third in the country. You think they're going to go out of their way to buy the Pac-12 network? You're an idiot. And you wanted to act like you're the smartest guy in the room just because you went to Harvard? Well, it turns out you were the dumbest guy in the room. And you ruined the conference. Now, it's not totally his fault, Because ultimately you could say this was inevitable. And it might have been. It might ultimately have been inevitable. Because ultimately as things go on, I heard Coward say this the other day, we used to have 780, major corporations in America. Now we have, 3,500. Things are consolidating. I say it all the time. I know people that run smaller businesses that are getting run by VC firms, and then they all merge. Part of this money game that we're living in, because as you get bigger, your expenses grow. So as your expenses grow, you have to make more money to afford to get bigger. This is like, you can talk about, academia loves talking about the whiteboard and the theories, and if this happens and this happens. Then there's us in the real world. Well, it's like, now this used to cost, my rent used to cost $10,000 a month. They just raised it to $17,000 a month. My payroll used to be $300,000. It's now $475,000. And this is regardless. Money's all relative. Whatever your business is, and as things go up, you have to pivot. You have to figure out ways to pay for things. And as the UCLA athletic director said, if we didn't do this deal, which they just piggybacked USC to go, we would have had to start cutting sports. We don't have the money. And I love, what about the endowments? Yeah, the endowments weren't set to play for the sports. That's not the way the business is set up for the colleges. But that's a fun thing that gets said on Twitter, which a bunch of people that have no clue what they're fucking talking about. So ultimately, money rules the day. It always has. And the bigger business you're in, it's only going to dictate. So does it piss me off? That's probably the wrong word. Does it hurt my heart a little bit that the Pac-12 died the moment these two teams left? Because that's what happened. Yes. But ultimately, in 3 or 4 years, will it matter that much? I doubt it. Because I thought the Raiders going to Vegas. I thought the Rams coming to LA. I thought Texas A&M going to the SEC. I thought all this stuff was going to, and none of it has. We just keep rocking and rolling. The games are on. They're fun. These programs have more money. Now, it's going to have ripple effects. Could Oregon State essentially become D1 AA? Yeah. Could Stanford ultimately cut football in the next 10 years? For sure. Like, all these things are on the table. But that's kind of the reality of life. Things, the bigger businesses get, you turn into the haves and the have-nots. That's why the cream rises to the top. And USC's brand at football is dramatically bigger than everyone out west. And that includes Oregon, who's had an incredible 20-year run. But their value on the open market clearly wasn't the same. And you can say UCLA benefits geographically. Well, yeah, they're in LA. So sure they do. Sometimes you just benefit from being in a certain market. Now, I would argue that UCLA's brand is still pretty massive. It's still pretty big. And to me, they are underachieving at football. Now, are they willing to spend $8-9 million on a football coach? Time will tell. Because to me, their only chance to maintain, because Lincoln's going to go into that conference and he's going to win. Now, I don't know if he's going to win it all, but he's going to compete immediately. Because beside Ohio State, he can coach with any of these guys. And he's going to be getting the talent. So the only people that are going to be able to recruit at his level there are Ohio State. So listen, it's crazy, but this is only the beginning. I don't think it's going to stop. And we are headed inevitably for basically NFC versus the AFC. Big Ten versus the SEC. The SEC will add Miami, Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina. The Big Ten will add Notre Dame. Who knows? Do they add Oregon, Washington? It doesn't seem like they're in any rush to now. But in this day and age, you can never say never. So, here's the other thing that kind of pisses me off too. It's like, Fox, ESPN, they're just doing the deals. You can't say that when you're also on the team side and being like, well, it's going to cost a lot of money to get our rights. Well, yeah, so if I'm Fox or I'm ESPN and I'm paying a shitload for the SEC, or I'm Fox paying a ton for the Big Ten, I go, listen, I have no problem giving you $800 million a year, $3 billion over however, 5 years, whatever the terms of the deal are. But I'm going to need something on my end. I never understood when I worked in radio, we paid a premium for the rights for like the NFL team. And it's like, what are they even giving us? They don't give us the star quarterback. They don't give us the players when we want it. I see it in my own backyard with the radio station that owns the Golden State Warriors. They pay a ton for the rights to broadcast the Warriors. And they get nothing back in return. They don't get any players. They occasionally get the coach. And the ratings aren't that great because we don't consume basketball on the radio. We watch it. It doesn't pencil. So if I'm going to give you a ton of money, how about I'll give you some ideas. Add USC and UCLA, and I'll give you even more. Or if I'm ESPN and I go to the Greg Sankey, I go, listen, We'll give you way more than CBS. And we'll even throw more on top of it if you get Texas and Oklahoma. Like, it's a win-win for everybody. I think Scott Van Pelt tweeted it recently, like, you guys are doing all this. And he's like, no, this is an orgy. We're all in this together. Because if we benefit, they benefit, everyone benefits. So yeah, did Fox want USC and UCLA there? Of course. Does Ohio State and Michigan want them there? Once they realize they're going to get more money, of course they do. So does everyone benefit that's involved in this transaction? Yes. Who doesn't benefit? The other teams in the Pac-12. Well, what's the reality? People don't want them. So you're only as valuable as the people that want you. And clearly USC and USC, or UCLA and USC had people banging down the doors. Crazy story. Feels like it's only the beginning, but we'll have to see how this all plays out. Hopefully everyone has a good week. We'll have a mailbag over the weekend. Adios. Thanks for watching 3 and Out. You can check out the podcast below in the description. And make sure you subscribe right now to the Volumes YouTube channel.